guys, I hope you're having a nice August afternoon. Today we're going to take a look at some facts about swifts. Swifts are fascinating birds. I don't know if you know much about them. Not many people do. So we're going to go through a list of bits of information about this fascinating bird. So swifts are, usually when we think of swifts, we also think of swallows, swifts and swallows, and martins, house martins. But in fact, swifts are not related to swallows. Their nearest relative is the hummingbird. They just have the very similar features to swallows and martins because of convergent evolution, which is when similar features develop in species of different lineages. Just because they have similar lifestyles, so they end up evolving in similar ways, but they're not actually closely related. They're both birds, but they're not in the same group. Swifts are migratory birds. The ones that go to Britain only spend 3 months of the year there, and the rest of their time is spent in Africa. And they go to Britain to breed, and also other places around Europe as well, of course. They usually arrive in May and leave in August or September. And they spend their winters in places all over Africa. They've been found in the Congo Basin, Malawi, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and even as far as South Africa. But it's very difficult to study these birds because of their lifestyle and their habits. So we still don't know what exact routes the birds use to migrate. But as an example, a young swift who was ringed in Oxford on the 31st of July was killed in Madrid on the 3rd of August. I don't know what year, it's not this year. But just as an example of how far they can travel in just a couple of days, he covered 1,300 kilometers in 3 days. Historically, swifts nested in trees, like in holes in old large trees. They don't do so that much anymore, mostly because those sort of trees aren't really available for them. They usually now nest in old buildings, in very old buildings, usually pre-Second World War buildings, although they can be in newer buildings, but it depends on the structure. They're not like swallows and martins building a nest with little bits that they stick to the wall. They have to actually go inside, like in a hole in the wall or behind some sort of panel. And they still nest in Scots pines in the Abernethy Forest in Scotland. So they're still doing it the old-fashioned way there. They live for quite a few years. If you look at a group of swifts, apparently the average age of these swifts is 7 years. So there will be some older and younger, but the average is 7. And the oldest swift ever found was 21. He had been ringed, I think, in Britain, and then he was found 21 years later, still alive with the ring. They usually lay just one clutch a year, usually with just 2 or 3 eggs, so they don't have vast numbers of babies every year. And the babies take a longer time to grow up than other birds such as songbirds. They can take about 6 weeks instead of 2 weeks like other birds to fledge. Swifts are monogamous, and the same pairs will breed together in successive years. But it's very difficult for humans to tell the difference between a male and female swift, even if we have them in our hands. It's very, very difficult. The really fascinating thing about these swifts, as well as their very impressive migration, is the fact that they live in the air. They spend the vast majority of their lives on the wing. So they don't come down from the sky to sleep in trees at night. They sleep in the air. They eat in the air because they eat insects, so they catch them as they fly. They drink in the air. They drink raindrops, which I think is very sweet. They can also drink from lakes if they kind of flutter down and skim across the surface of the lake to get a few drops of water that way. They actually spend usually they spend their first 2 years of life in the air, flying all the time, and usually only come down to nest. They even mate when they're in the air, and the only time when they are not flying in their whole lives is when they are sitting on the nest, minding the babies. It's thought that they are able to maybe turn off half of their brain during the night, like to sleep a little bit, let one half of their brain sleep while the other one continues going as they fly through the air. And maybe they take currents of wind and kind of spiral a bit, and then, changing the elevation during the night. But we still don't really know for sure. It's still quite mysterious. No one knows whether the breeding pairs, the male and female, stay in contact during the rest of the year, because they get back together again every year to mate, but we don't know if they're still in contact or if they spend some time apart and then meet up again when the time is right. They are totally dependent on insects and airborne prey, which unfortunately means that if there is a period of bad weather, baby swifts can end up starving to death if their parents can't catch enough insects for them to eat. However, they are quite adapted to this because the babies can survive without food for up to 48 hours, longer than other baby birds. They go into a kind of a semi-hibernation state where they just kind of, all of the processes are just like running at a lower, like a computer. when you put your computer sleeping instead of turning it off. So they're able to conserve energy in that way. And I think adults are able to do the same as well for a few days also. They have a very interesting shape, especially with their feet. They don't have, there are a couple of different forms of bird feet. And usually in birds, you have almost like a thumb, or even two thumbs. You have the forward and the backward facing toes. But swifts don't have any at the back. They just have like fingers that can like hook onto things. So they can't actually support themselves very well to stand up or to walk any distance. Because they never really need to in their lives. They're just all about flying, so they never really need to walk. So their feet are not ideal for that kind of thing. A lot of people think swifts cannot take off from a flat surface, but that's not true. They can do so by flapping their powerful wings and then taking off. The adults can do so without problems. The younger birds might have some issues doing that, but they will probably be able to do so. When they are looking for a suitable place to nest, you will often find them tapping on places that they think could be useful, like just with their wings as they fly by, to check if there is already another swift in there. And if there is, the swift will come to the opening shrieking, probably saying, "Go away, this is mine." And in recent years, there has been a decline in the number of swifts, probably, well, for a few reasons. Maybe we don't have the ideal trees for them anymore. Also, modern buildings are not exactly ideal for them. And other problems such as the use of insecticides obviously kills the insects that they need to eat. It can affect them directly, but also can just reduce the number of insects, leaving them without enough food. If you find a swift, you should look for expert help because they can be quite difficult to rear. Many people make the mistake of feeding them food like cat food or dog food that they might feed to any other bird like a starling that they find, but swifts cannot eat food that other birds can eat. They have to have an insect-only diet. So, for example, giving them mealworms would be one of the solutions. And I'll tell you a little bit about my experience with swifts. Last year, I think it was at the end of August, beginning of September, I found a little bird and he seemed to be injured and in shock. And for a while, I didn't know what kind of bird he was. I took him home and put him somewhere safe, tried to get him to drink water or do anything, but he was really unresponsive. He barely would open his eyes. He was bleeding a little bit on one side, although I couldn't see where the blood was coming from, and he just wouldn't eat or drink anything. And I think it was a day that the vet wasn't open, or I couldn't get to the vet, so I just had to do my best with this swift at home. And after a lot of internet searching, I finally realized that he was a swift. And then I understood why he had strange feet and was kind of clinging on to the side of the cage, and then later to a towel that I put in a box. He didn't want to be down low. He wanted to be just clinging on, hanging on to something. Luckily, I did the right thing without even realizing, because I thought, even if he's not eating, at least he should get some water, because it was quite hot as well at the time. And I would put drops of water just on the side of his mouth, and then now and again he would open his mouth and just kind of lick the drop of water in. And then after a while he started doing some little poos, so I could see things were getting back to normal. His systems were going back to normal. The next day when he went to the vet, we got some proper guidance on what to do, and so he got settled in. We had a special little box for him. I was giving him mealworms, a couple of mealworms, many times a day, every time he asked. Although at the beginning he didn't understand that I could feed him. I had to gently force his beak open and give him some mealworms. When you're giving mealworms to baby birds, it's very good idea to drown them or kill them somehow first, because if they are not dead when the baby bird eats them, they could bite the bird, because older birds know that you have to kill the mealworms before eating them, and other insects as well. Unfortunately, the baby swift was very adventurous, and every time he started climbing out of his box and going up the curtain. And he did this again and again and again. And at some point, he broke the nail on one of his feet. And it looked quite painful, and it seemed to get... I wasn't sure if it was infected. It was very swollen and red, and the nail broke at the base, but it stayed connected. So every time he moved, the nail would twist, and it just seemed to get worse then the nail fell off. The vet gave me some antiseptic fluid to drip onto it, and so I did that a couple of times a day. But the thing was, the Swift was so restless whenever he was alone, and by this point he had gotten quite attached to me. So every time I left him alone, he would be shouting to get out again. And then when I took him in my hand, he was very calm. Another thing about Swifts is their feathers are very, very important. Their feathers have to develop perfectly, and you don't want anything to get on the feathers. So not even the natural oils from your fingers and hands. You shouldn't touch their feathers too much. So what I used to do was put a piece of tissue in the palm of my hand and let him sit there on top of it. But he was only happy when he was in my hand. And because I was worried about his nail, about it getting infected because it was swollen and red, I thought maybe there's a bit of an infection. I really don't want this to spread. I just let him sit in my hand for most of the day, for a couple of days. And I was, working and typing on the computer, and he was just sitting there in my hand all the time. Most of the time just dozing. And then he would want to get some food, so he would make some noises, little shouts. I would give him a couple of mealworms. Another thing about Swifts is connected to the feather thing. It's like they understand that they need to keep their feathers perfect. And something that can be bad for feathers and make them sticky and matted is, of course, poo. So the Swifts, naturally in the nest, they kind of designate a corner as the poo corner, the toilet. And they know that they have to kind of shuffle over and do a poo in the corner and then leave the corner. And apparently the adult Swift as well will eat up the poo just to keep the nest area tidy. And it might give them some minerals as well. That's what I've read. So yeah, my Swift knew that he couldn't just poo where he was. He had to go elsewhere. So I always knew when he wanted to go to the toilet, because he would start looking around, looking a little bit nervous, a little bit stressed, like what am I going to do? And then he would kind of shuffle over to the edge of my hand. And then the first time he did it, it took me by surprise. And we ended up with a poo on the floor. But then after that, I knew what he was doing, so I would just immediately put a tissue or a basin below to catch the falling poo. But it's fascinating the way it's all, it all comes like programmed in their head. They know what to do for the best of their health and survival. After a while of having taken care of this little Swift, who was becoming very attached, I was talking to the vet, and he had another little baby Swift that he had been looking after, and he suggested putting the two of them together so that they, know who they are, they grow up together, it would be better. So I took the second Swift as well. Second Swift was much wilder than my Swift. My Swift was like a little fat teddy bear beside the vet's Swift. And at first they didn't get along very well at all. They just seemed to, it was like they were fighting. But bit by bit, they managed to become great friends. And it was great to have a way to detach the Swift from me. I didn't have to have him in my hand all the time. At the same time, his nail was getting better. It still stayed a little bit swollen because the vet thought that maybe he had broken the top of the bone there, but it wasn't infected anymore. When Swifts are growing up, they eat more and more and more. I went through so many mealworms. And they also start doing exercises to get ready to leave the nest. So they flap their wings a lot very fast. And then they start to do push-ups, which is when they put all of their weight on their wings and kind of lift their body up. it's really impressive to see him to, just again, because they know what they have to do, but also they just lift their whole body up and put the weight on the wings. And so the two baby swifts started doing a lot of exercises. And then in the days before they're really ready to go, the weight starts to drop and they start to eat less. And this is because they can't be too heavy to fly. So again, it's all programmed into them. Everything follows a routine. And I checked with about one last time, and he said they were ready to go because they were the right size. They were losing a bit of weight. Their weight was evening off, as well as their hunger, and their wings overlapped at the bottom. So when the wings overlap by about nearly an inch at the bottom, then they're pretty much ready to go. They also took a couple of test flights in the house, although they really shouldn't because it's a bit dangerous. They might bump into things, but they did anyway. I was trying to set them free for a couple of days, but we had some bad weather, so I was putting it off. Meanwhile, I was just letting them look outside at the sky, looking at the other swifts that you could see in the air. And they used to be really afraid of seeing the sky. I remember when I brought my one out when he was very young, he looked at the sky and he just hid his head in my hand. He didn't want to see. And bit by bit, they got used to looking outside and being okay with looking at the sky. And then finally, the day came when the weather was better, and I said, okay, I'm going to set them free tomorrow. And that was the first night that they didn't cry. It was really weird. It was like they knew that they can't be babies anymore. They had this weird way of crying and making some strange noises at night. Obviously, it's not like sad crying. It's just what they do. The vet said it was normal. They just make noises all night long. And the night before they left, they barely made a sound. It was really strange. And then early in the morning, I took them up to the balcony and just showed them the sky, just took them out of the basin in my hand, and they knew it was time to go, and off they went, flying high in the sky. And swifts don't come back to humans. There was no chance of them coming back to perch on me. They don't perch on people. They don't perch in general. So once they were gone, that was it. And the next day, I saw a couple of swifts that seemed quite small flying over the house. Of course, I don't know if it was them, but they were flying nearby. So it could have been them. And then only a few days later, all the swifts, about a week later, all the swifts were gone. So they went at the right time. They probably found a group of swifts nearby and then travelled with them south to Africa. So all in all, it was a fascinating experience. If you find a swift, make sure to get expert advice. I suppose the best thing is to give it to a centre who are specialised in this, but if you're going to raise it yourself, get some proper advice, because they're very different birds from all the other birds. Really interesting creatures. And I'm going to add in a couple of pictures and videos at the end so you can see what my experience was like. Let me know if you have ever raised a swift or any other baby bird. I'd love to hear your experiences.